Hello to folks who are just filing in. Welcome to today's Clean Water webinar. We're going to give it a couple minutes and get started right at noon Central. But if you are hearing my voice, hello, and feel free to drop in where you're tuning in from in the chat. We always like to see where folks are. Today's talk will definitely have a bit of a Iowa focus, but hopefully the lessons learned and everything are transferable, I think, to broader geographic scope. And if you have any questions or technical difficulties, drop that in the chat or the Q&A, and me or Maggie will help you with that. All right, for folks who are just joining us, welcome. This is our Clean Water webinar all about removing barriers to conservation with batch and build. If you're just joining us, definitely encourage you to say hi and maybe even where you're tuning in from in the chat. And we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Heather. I'm the Midwest Save Our Streams coordinator, and I'm joined by John Swanson with the Polk County Public Works in Central Iowa. And we're going to be hearing from him about this innovative way to get more conservation practices on the landscape. Before we dive in and I hand over the proverbial microphone, just some housekeeping. We have a Q&A box. It should be kind of at the bottom of your screen with a little like chat bubble with a question mark inside. If you have questions throughout John's talk, make sure to drop your questions in the Q&A. It's a little bit easier for us to find the questions so that we can answer them systematically. And you can also use the chat to make a note or comment throughout. And this webinar is being recorded. So if you miss anything, or if you just want to go back and revisit, or if you want to share it, we will be sharing the recording after the fact. I think that's pretty much everything. If you do have questions or if you have technical difficulties, drop a question in the chat. Me or my colleague Maggie will help you out. But without further ado, we're going to pass things off to John Swanson.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. And happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're enjoying a nice lunch. You can sit back and listen to John's ramblings about conservation. But in all seriousness, a topic I love to talk about because for me, it has been career changing. It's changed the way that we interact with private landowners and farmers. It's changed the way that we've put together our conservation programs. And the thing is, we call it batch and build. So if you're from Iowa, you may have heard a little bit about it before. If you're not from Iowa, you may be like, what is batch and build? And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. But before I jump in too far, who am I? I'm a dude that likes to crawl into holes, not drink tile water, but spend a lot of time thinking about conservation, thinking about private lands conservation. I've spent the last 13 years working in Iowa, putting conservation projects on the ground. That's like literally what I do. It's all I do. It's all I think about is how do we put more conservation projects on the ground. And I work for Polk County, kind of a unique that we have a water resources division that we started under our public works departments. And as we look at this map of Iowa, kind of like why is Polk County in this game of working with farmers and doing watershed work? Well, we're dead center right there in the middle of Iowa. We have the Des Moines River, we have the Raccoon River, we have several Huck 10s coming into our county, and water's been a big deal for us. A big deal from the top down, from our board of supervisors down. We've really prioritized water quality and flooding as something we need to be working on. And what that's created is not only like the freedom to, but the expectation to think outside the box, the expectation to try new things, the expectation to fail, to succeed. And it's created a pretty fun atmosphere to do good work. And all those things set the stage for the batch and build. And if we take this one step closer, well, let's look at the actual landscape here in central Iowa. We have the Des Moines Lobe, which is the last glacier moved through Iowa, and it stopped right in the heart of Polk County, right about the doorsteps to the Capitol building. And so as we look upstream, everything above us is generally speaking, heavy, wet soils, beautiful black soil, a lot of water coming at us. And understanding how can we work on this Des Moines lobe landscape has been something that we've been going back and forth for a long time. And as we kind of look, I mean, here's kind of a picture I love to throw in to kind of show what that landscape looks like for us. And even though Polk County, we have the biggest urban population in the state, if you get a mile or two outside of our urban areas, this is what you see, just like much of the rest of Iowa. And we have streams, drainage ditches, we have a lot of tile drained landscape, and especially moving north, a generally flat rolling topography. And all that kind of led into this idea of treating nutrients, treating tile water for nitrate removal. And that's kind of the story I'm going to tell today. I'm going to kind of walk through this story of how the batch and build came together. But really, I'd urge all of you to think about not just the practices we're talking about, but really the process. And what we've taken away from batch and build is it's a process that can be applied to almost any practice, urban, ag, water quality, flood control. But for us, the story did start with saturated buffers. So kind of the basics, saturated buffer, what do we know? We know that these intercept tile. They generally treat a 4 to 10 inch tile system, usually 15 to 16 acres of drainage coming into those tiles that can be treated with a saturated buffer. Pros of them, they have a long lifespan. I mean, really, they'll last as long as the pipes last underground. And you just need about a 30-foot buffer, vegetated buffer along a stream to squeeze one of these in. And real basic, how it works is water comes in from the top right there from the field. It hits a water control box, and the water is then distributed through a distribution pipe that lays perpendicular to the stream. And water then seeps out of that perforated pipe and goes through those soils. And if you have the right soil characteristics, you're generally going to see a 50 to 60% nitrate reduction from the water that gets pushed into these distribution lines. Another beauty, they're simple. If you've ever been to a saturated buffer field day, they're incredibly unimpressive to look at. And that's because they're underground. All you see is this little box. But what they do well is they just do their job day in and day out. They're underground doing their thing, and they're relatively cheap. Generally, we're seeing like $3,000 to $5,000 for an installation cost for one of these things. That you plop it in the ground, it's going to be there doing nitrate reductions for you. And here's kind of an aerial picture. You can see this is prior to a buffer being installed, but this is actually a tile plow plowing in that distribution line. At the very top, you see the backhoe of the picture. That's where the tiles is dumping into the stream currently. That's where the water control structure is installed to divert water into that new distribution line, which then right after this is when we added that vegetated buffer. And so just envision why, right? Water's being pushed into that line behind that plow. And as it goes in, it's going to start seeping out of that flat level line, and it's going to start seeping towards the stream. And you're going to see that nitrate reduction from carbon-rich black soils that are going to interact with those nitrates and release it as a harmless gas. Now, worth noting, saturated buffers don't work everywhere, so you can't oftentimes speak about saturated buffers without speaking about its counterpart, the bioreactor or the wood chip bioreactor. Some of the good things to know about a bioreactor, generally looking at a little bit bigger drainage areas, 40 to 100 acres, sometimes bigger. Again, minimal maintenance. But what the main difference here is they do have a lifespan. So you're using the wood chips instead of the topsoil to provide your carbon material to remove those nitrates from the water. So expectations, so not all of these have been in 15 to 20 years, but those wood chips do break down. And so you look at doing a recharge after that 15 to 20 years, where essentially you have to dig the cap off. You got to remove those old wood chips and put new ones in. And your installation costs, again, a little bit bigger on the front end, $10,000 to $20,000, depending on the size, but similar nutrient reductions in that 50 to 60% nitrate load reduction. And then boom, there's a picture just like on the cover slide. It's just that simple. It's a pit filled with wood chips. You're diverting the tile water into it, and those wood chips are going to help you get your nitrate reduction. Now let's just think about it. So we have these two practices. They go underground. They remove nitrates. All right, so how do we get people to install these? Well, it's worth noting like how most programs in Iowa work is through what we call traditional cost share. And I love this slide because it goes all the way back. Think about Iowa 100 years ago. We had the Dust Bowl was happening, massive amounts of erosion happening. And the government said, man, if we're going to fix this, we have to figure out how to do conservation on private lands. And this first idea of cost share, where let's split the cost between a private landowner and a government program to do conservation on private lands. And now fast forward 100 years, you have dozens of programs across Iowa that do just that. They split the cost for different practices on the landscape. Many of them go through the local NRCS field office, and the actual rates for the cost share vary widely, a lot of times based upon the practice, the funding availability, and the goals of, say, that watershed or county. Commonly, a lot of cost shares are 50-50. So 50% is paid by the landowner, 50% is paid by the government program. In some cases, you have 75% government program, 25% landowner. And generally speaking, we in Polk County really a lot of times oppose paying for all of a practice. But as we get into, maybe there's some scenarios where we would want to pay for the full installation cost of a practice. But hey, with anything, nothing's that easy. If it was easy, anyone would do it. And for us, for saturated buffers and bioreactors, we're having a problem. We weren't getting people to install them. And I will tell you, the problem was not a lack of efforts. So from 2015 to 2020, we were working in these watersheds. We were really knocking on people's doors. We were calling people, doing field days and mailers. And we even worked up to where we were going to do 100% cost share. And part of that was because we were going to a farmer or landowner and we're asking them to install a practice that really didn't fix anything on their farm. It didn't improve their yields. We were asking it to be installed just to filter and clean the water to help someone downstream. So very different than like an erosion practice where we're like, hey, we want to help you fix a problem in your field or do something in your actual farming operation. So we were trying all this stuff. And to be frank, in those 5 years, we had 6 installs. We did 4 saturated buffers and 2 bioreactors, which was honestly pretty equivalent to many other watershed projects across the states. But I will tell you, I remember the year that we installed 2 practices, and I was like, oh man, we got this now. Like we figured this out. It's all we got. We're going to be rolling now. But it just never really picked up. And to put in perspective, in one of our Huck 10 watersheds, we actually had a goal to treat 100 tile outlets. And we were kind of coming to this realization that maybe we needed to change some stuff. So what we did is we started really doing some reflection about what we were doing. We started talking to people about maybe what if we changed some stuff up. And the real problems that we began to understand at the time was, one, saturated buffers and bioreactors were pretty new practices at the time. There were actually a lot of misunderstandings about applicability and how programs were being allowed to be used. Prime example, like, could we install them on CRP or not? Or did that have to happen during a re-enrollment year? We were spending a lot of time going out with landowners, and we were talking about all the different practices that could go on the landscape. We might talk about cover crops and grassed waterways. And what happened time and time again, we kept seeing is treating tile outlets was getting lost in the conversation around other practices. But when we did get somebody that was really engaged, we were hitting a couple other hurdles that we maybe didn't really understand until it became very clear to us. And that was, imagine you're a landowner, right? And I came to you and like, I am John, I'm the government, I'm here to help you treat your water. And say you made it through that conversation. And someone's like, yep, I want to install a saturated buffer. We're like, awesome. We'll survey it and do a design. It'll take us about a year to design one of these saturated buffers. You're like, okay, well, that's quite a while. But say you made it through that year. We're like, awesome, get you signed up for these programs. Now, if you could go find a contractor and you could hire that contractor and you could front the money and we'll help make sure it gets installed correctly. And then on the back end, even though we're offering 100%, we'll have to reimburse you for that. Oh, but by the way, any of the money that we do give you, you are going to get taxed on that money. And oh, I know it's really hard to find contractors because these tilers are usually doing much bigger projects and they don't want to install a $3,000 saturated buffer. But if you make it through all this stuff, we'd love to work with you. And really, nobody was making it through that process, right? And what we deemed all that up to was what we started calling the hassle factor, right? Because we thought people really wanted to do the right thing and help us clean the water. But in today's busy world where someone might be a farmer, they also maybe have another job, they're trying to get their kids to soccer practice. We're like, this is just too much of a hassle. There's too much responsibility being put on the landowner or the farmer. So boom, as many good things happened, a chance meeting happened between a watershed coordinator, a local SWCD commissioner, and a local ag business leader, and an idea was kind of formed over this lunch meeting. And they're like, what if we just focused on like one goal? And that was like, what if we just like we want to treat tile outlets? And what if we actually targeted landowners and we what if we even mapped out where these things could go and we brought the idea to them? And like, is there a different funding model that we could do where maybe the landowner doesn't have to hire the contractor? And they kept fleshing this out. I actually wasn't even at this lunch meeting, but my partner in crime at the time was. And like, what if we group sites together? And like, what if we could like a year is just too long for the survey and design? Like, what if we could group them together to design them faster? And what if we could install like the idea was like 20? Like maybe a contractor would be more interested in building 20 saturated buffers and bioreactors instead of one. And then we could even like bid them out in groups of different sizes to find out what's most efficient. And the last idea that was kind of being pondered was like, so we're asking these landowners to install practices to help clean water, and we're asking them to own and maintain it. Could we even offer them some type of incentive payment? And lo and behold, that all turned into what we called the batch and build process. So this idea of targeting, of grouping sites together, of being faster, and something else about managing the money different than the traditional cost share way where the landowner has to hire the contractor. And so the first thing we're like, okay, how are we gonna do this outreach thing? We're like, should we do field days? And I'll be honest, I've had some of the worst field day experiences in the entire world where I have like 20 people come and 17 of them are like government staff, and the three landowners are the same ones we always work with. And again, coming back to if you've ever been to a saturated buffer field day, like there's just not much to look at. And so this gets us to our first lesson I'm going to sprinkle into the presentation, which was lesson number one. We want to target. And now looking back, this maybe has become one of the most important pieces of the batch and build where we've really come to kind of this realization that maybe landowners walking into our office to talk about conservation, that doesn't happen nearly as much. And I think that really has been the case through COVID, is we can't wait for people to come to us. We can't just invite people to our field days. We need to identify our priorities and create a list of landowners, which what I always call, everyone keeps telling me not to say it, but I'm like a hit list. I'm like, who is on our hit list that we need to engage and talk with? And although we don't call it a hit list, like create a list and hit them up for some work, right? Take it to them. And that's where the batch and build then kind of got us through, which was we actually use the ACPF, the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework tool, which one of the outputs of that tool is what fields do you have a high chance of saturated buffers working? We took that tool and we created a list of landowners, and we didn't call it a hit list. But we then did targeted outreach. We actually sent a letter to every landowner with a map of their field, and we promised them that someone, and we gave them the name, would be calling them within 1 week of them receiving that letter. And the key here was if by any chance they actually read the letter, they could expect a call from that first year, Tanner or Keegan, from this phone number to talk to them about us wanting to get into their field. And that whole goal of this target outreach was very simple. All we wanted to do was permission to survey your fields. Like we've done our homework. We think you have a good shot of this working, and we want to get into your field. And that was our entire ask. And what we did that first year and every year after then is we actually assigned every landowner to a project manager. And the goal here was, again, doing things a little bit different. What did we hear from some landowners was they're like, well, every time I call the office, I talk to a different person or they send me to somebody else, and I don't get clear answers through the process. And government programs can just be kind of confusing. And I don't like how that's been going. So from our first year and every year after that, we assign every landowner a project manager. And it could be Keegan on the top right there, Tanner or Ruth. And that is the only person that they ever have to talk to through the entire process. And if they don't know the answer, that's okay. But they'll go find the answer for you and just simplify the conversation. And that really leads us into this lesson number two that's really stuck out to me that I actually learned from Ruth, which is accountability. Like, you can't be a passive government employee who goes home at 4, like, to just say it bluntly. And I'll tell you, I have my own struggles with working too much, like some of us do. And I'll say you have to like work all night, but like again, you have to be personable. You have to like if someone calls you and they need an answer, you need to be able to like just pick up the phone and build a relationship with them. And you have to set expectations and be available for them. And again, if you don't know the answer, the worst thing you can do is just make up an answer. Just find the answer and get back to them. And at the end of the day, I don't think too many of us were really trained in this way, but how do you be a salesperson? Like be a salesman for conservation. And Ruth was actually she works for a local co-op, and we actually partnered together on some of these projects. And her whole pitch is around being a good salesperson for landowners. So lesson number two, the best way to build a relationship with someone is just be accountable and do your best. And so what, lo and behold, we did this outreach, and hey, we had people telling us yes. And we actually had to learn how to survey more efficiently. So that first year, we surveyed 130 outlets. And again, I remember the year we surveyed 10 outlets, and we thought that was going to be awesome. And we quickly learned we needed to be much more efficient with our survey process. We were surveying now, I think the record was maybe 15 tile outlets in a day, but for every site, we actually standardized our survey process, and we developed a coding system. So every tile outlet got a code name that would stick to it all the way through the design. And that standardized survey did include a topo, a soil test, a tile survey, and a nitrate sample. And we did have this mindset, and we've stuck with this every year, is saturated buffers are primary practice goal. And we are proving to ourselves if a saturated buffer doesn't work, we have enough information to look at a bioreactor as a secondary practice. And we do that intentionally because of the lifespan and the low cost of the saturated buffers. But there are scenarios where they won't work. So we get out, we go, imagine now we're going out, we're getting our survey. Well, now, again, we used to take a year to design one practice. Hey, we can do better than that. So we like, okay, we're going to do just a preliminary design. So we told these landowners, like, okay, give us permission to survey, and we're going to come back to you in about 2 months. And in 2 months, we're going to tell you, does a saturated buffer work on your field, or 5 saturated buffers, or 5 saturated buffers and 2 bioreactors, or does nothing work, or anything in between? And to be honest, designs can be complicated. We've had scenarios where we're tying multiple outlets together. We've tried automated saturated buffers, reverse grade bioreactors. And we learned some lessons after we've been through the design so many times, which is we've learned to be a little bit more selective about what sites we survey. For example, we don't generally survey 4-inch outlets anymore. We have to understand the designer's needs and time. So we try not to make our designers ever have to go out to the field. When, in fact, we just want to gather enough information that we can ship it off to them and get them to work efficiently. And that first year, we partnered with NRCS on design, and we actually did 90 of these feasibilities. So again, 120 surveys, 90 of them were deemed feasible. And we did 90 feasibilities in 6 weeks. And then a few weeks after that, we followed back up with these landowners, and they got to choose, again, have a more sit down at the kitchen table type conversation. And 60 of those moved into full design. And our goal was to do 60 designs in 6 months. So again, with this grouping method, we were able to go from 1 design in a year, quite literally, to at least 60 full designs in a year. And this is where experience comes down to it. If you have experienced staff, just like anything else. But the key here is we can design terraces and ponds and waterways. We can design saturated buffers and bars. It's just different. And since that first year, we've also gotten into consultant design. And to be right to the point, if you give them a big group, they will want to do it. But we are looking at about $2,500 per site on average. Now, that's a significant uptick for, say, a saturated buffer that on the high end might cost $5,000. It's going to go to 7,500. So we've tried to push away from consultant designs as much as possible. So again, back to the story, right? We did a bunch of outreach. People said, yeah, go out and survey. We got our designs under our belt. We went back to them, and we got all these 130 sites this first year going through the queue. And we thought we had to get organized. So we actually had this giant dry erase board where every time we were out and surveyed, we were assigning, there's all our, don't look too closely at those track numbers, but we're like, hey, let's get organized. Well, pretty soon this 6-foot tall dry erase board was not big enough, and we had to actually get organized. So these are real screenshots or a picture of our spreadsheets that we now have, where every site, every landowner gets put into this spreadsheet. If it's John Swanson's farm, the first tile we surveyed would be JS1. As we go from upstream to downstream, the next tile we find will be JS2, and then JS3. And eventually that's the same label that gets put onto our designs, and that gets labeled on water control structures and on flags. And we then even did a color coding system where light green, the project was still moving forward. If for some reason the landowner backed out or we started having design issues, it'd go to a yellow. If the site ever fell off our sheet, it went to a red line. And it was a way for us, anyone on our team at any time, to be able to check in what the status is of a project. And this is really for the first time where this team element started coming into play, where we had multiple project managers, team lead, designers. But the beauty of that team is all of us had other jobs we were doing too. We weren't just doing this, and allowed us to be flexible when new things arose. Like in our second year, where we had some changes in our cultural resources field requirements, which you might not think. You're like, okay, we're gonna go dig some holes and make sure we're not causing any negative cultural resources impacts. But in our second year, this equated to several hundred holes that we had to dig, right? And we're like, that's just crazy. But what we did is we took our team, we broke into teams of two. We always had one certified cultural resources person on each team. And we, in some cases, were able to dig close to 100 holes in just a very short period. And that gets to the third lesson of the day, which is when you're getting into the batch and build, at least for this, it can be a grind of field work. So every spring, our goal has been to spend at least 3 days a week for a 6 to 8 week period surveying all day, every day. And I always tell this as kind of we've gotten more people into the fold. Like it is a grind, and you have to kind of get in this mindset, which is a very fun mindset to be outside working that hard. But if you have staff that are used to maybe being in the office a lot, the grind can get very real. And so we always really just like make people ready to go out and do some field work and do it for a few weeks or months at a time. And so maybe one of the most important pieces has been this idea of a different funding model. And at the time, this first year, the batch and build was evolving. It wasn't even called the batch and build; it was called the Blitz project. But we knew we wanted a different funding model to simplify for landowners. And the best thing we can do is like, right, you find other people doing good stuff and you take their ideas and apply it to your projects. And at that time, back in 2020, the Iowa watershed approach was doing some great wetland work in eastern Iowa. And there, the county was actually operating as what they called a fiscal agent. And so the county was actually hiring the contractor to build these wetlands. And they're like, it clicked in our head. We're like, okay, well, what if Polk County hired the contractor who would do these installs? And then the money never has to go to landowners. They don't have to get taxed. They don't have to deal with hiring contractors. And then that'd be our way to group these projects together and install them in a grouping. And that's where this kind of fiscal agent funding model that we call it came into play. So we started looking at this more like a public improvement project where just like we build a road, we're going to build conservation practices. Polk County is going to be the fiscal agent. We're going to take in state, federal, local, private, anybody that wants to fund these projects, we'll take it through an agreement rather than a cost share agreement with the landowner. We'll utilize the funding to bid out the project in a group. And we also learned how the county, I was new at the county at the time. We had a process where how does a Polk County contractor go onto private lands? Well, you do it through a temporary construction and access easements. And we did want to compensate. We commonly compensated people for these easements on other types of projects. So what we opted that first year was to offer a $1,000 easement payment for every project that made it to the finish line. So, right, incentive, that idea of an incentive came back up. So if someone's installing 10 practices, treating 10 tile outlets, they do get $10,000. And truly, it made the process itself a lot easier. And the landowner, in addition to signing that easement, they also sign a 10-year maintenance agreement that says they're going to own and maintain it. And the fiscal agent is not on the hook for long-term responsibility. So just like it's their tile, as soon as we're done with construction, there's a 30-day window. We walk the land together. Everyone agrees it was installed properly. Easement ends. It does not get recorded. And it is a private practice just like every other one. And again, funding never goes to the landowner. There's no tax considerations. And I will tell you, we've had a vision that could we lower costs enough that maybe even this easement payment's all a wash. And although we're paying it, could we lower costs by grouping things together? And here's a beautiful diagram. Not that beautiful, but to kind of show how this works, right? So there's a lot going on here. So on the right, you have all these different funding. So we've used state IDOLS funding. That first year, Polk County has kicked in funding, and we actually have after that as well. And we've also used some private fundraising dollars and some grants, but all those are assigned through a fiscal agent agreement to Polk County. And then we've also used EQIP and RCPP funds through an assignment of payment form where the landowner can actually assign the payment over to the county as their fiscal agents. And then there's the fiscal agent, which in our case was Polk County in the middle there. And we have each landowner sign a temporary construction easement and a maintenance agreement. And the maintenance agreements are held by the soil and water conservation districts. Once we have everyone signed up and we have all the funding agreements in place and we get all the designs done, we send out a bid package, and Polk County, we hire the contractor. So a little bit different at the time, but it was quite a big change for us. And that gets to lesson number 4, which is this conventional cost share model can be very effective for mutually beneficial practices, but lacks on those that are for the greater good projects. So again, think about it. If you're wanting to fix something in your field, of course you'd want to put some money into it. It's a mutual win. It helps your field. But if I'm going to you and say, I want you to install saturated buffer, and you say, well, does it help my yields? You're like, no. Does it fix a problem on my field? No. We're literally just asking you to manage nitrates for downstream water quality. That's where this conventional cost share model, I think, has really been hard for us. And to be real, government programs are always going to be complicated, but with this fiscal agent funding model, it's allowed us to take a lot of those complications and deal with them kind of behind closed doors. Like, we do funding agreements. There's just you don't need to worry too much about where the funding comes from. We'll take care of that. You just got to make sure that we're properly installing the practices on your field and trying to just simplify it for the landowner. So as we're kind of wrapping up the whole process, right? So we targeted the outreach. We figured out how to survey and design faster. We came up with a different funding model that took a lot of the pressures off the landowners and put those pressures on conservation professionals. And we grouped these things together. We tried to bid them out in groupings. And then we went out and installed them. And none of this I wouldn't be here talking today if we didn't have some results. And what do those results look like? Well, I mentioned we had 6 installs in 5 years. That round 1, we had a goal of 20. We actually did 51 installations in Polk County. Round 2, we moved up into Story County and helped them get a group going. 85 installations in year 2. Year 3, round 3, which after taking a year off from some staff turnover in 2024, we had 63 installations. And as of today, the latest tally that I have been told, 13 counties or programs across Iowa kind of mimicking this same process, over 500 under design and hundreds getting installed. To put in perspective, that first year, this is such an outdated slide that we still called it the Blitz Project. So went through a couple names. But in those first 2 years, just in 2 counties, we installed just about the same number that we saw statewide over an 11-year period. So again, that's what we needed. We needed an uptick in practices. We needed more adoption happening. And a couple of these tweaks, it upped things significantly. And so I love to think critically about what we're doing. So some of those things that we've thought about, some of our major takeaways, right? We have this new mindset. We come into a field, we want to treat every tile outlet possible. We never want to have to come back again. We're going to come in, let's treat them all. Let's do your neighbors, let's do them all at the same time. Let's make this as efficient as possible, and we can get more done. I would say very clear that all outreach, survey, design, and construction all benefited from this bundling approach. Consultant design is effective but costly. We do everything we can. We actually now in-house do our own designs with one of our staff members. It can be done. It's just different. Cost analysis, we had a partner do a cost analysis from our first year. We did pay $52,000 in easement payments, but we calculated $115,000 savings in overall project costs. And to be honest, there's been some kickback from I think traditional conservation planners and things about like how we shouldn't be focusing on one practice. But what I've been telling everyone, like, what happens when you build one practice is you naturally build a relationship with people and other practice opportunities arise. So we've come back to those same landowners. We've done cover crops, we've done wetlands, we've done grass waterways. We've done all these different things that all came from just because we installed the saturated buffer to get started. But again, as expansion happens, the thing that I would say has led to successful batch and builds and those that have been unsuccessful is, can you really build a team? Because if you drum up all this interest, you got to be ready to follow through with it. And so here's actually the full the saturated buffer bioreactor. This is the full process. This is batch and build. And we've now done this 3 rounds. It's a full 2-year process, right? That seems like a lot, but year one, right, before spring field work, planting season, we are doing our outreach. February, March, we're doing our outreach. Our goal is to have all outreach done by mid-March. March through June, our goal is to survey every field that we got permission on. And then coming back to those landowners midsummer, again, after spring field work, and we're presenting them design feasibility. We're completing design feasibility and we're having our follow-up landowner meeting. So this is our second touch with the landowner, right? First touch was a cold phone call. Second touch was a sit down at their kitchen table, going over what should work in their fields and going over really how the fiscal funding works and the maintenance agreements and all the details. And if they say yes, we kick those projects back into full design and we complete conservation planning. This all leads up to generally around February the second year. We have our third and final meeting with the landowners, which is a final sign-up meeting where they sign all the documents in one meeting. As soon as that's done, we go through the project bid letting process, which is not a small endeavor. So our goal is to be awarding projects by late April, early May, and then basically May through December, we construct the projects. Now, we have been constructing them about 50 at a time. I will tell you that that's probably higher than most contractors are able to do, but we have a couple locally that are really into it. And I usually tell other counties, I strongly recommend trying to do like 25 your first year. But this is not what we tell landowners. We tell them what to expect. It's not fast, but it is clear. And we tell them when we're going to bring them, and then we simply do it. And the last lesson, putting it all together, batch and build, it really is just around building your team, targeting your practice, targeting your landowners, using science to target people. Now, I would tell you for years of my younger career, we were always told not to target people. Like people don't want to be targeted. But we kind of just put that to the wayside and did it anyways. And what we kept hearing from people is they were like, wow, we appreciate that you did your homework before you even called us. We appreciate that you're using science and that it's not just an open ask. You're coming to us with a purpose. Map those out, do methodical outreach, fiscal agent funding model. I got 2 number 2s there. What's a typo? What's a presentation without typo? And lastly, group installations. What I'll end with, looks like we've got a few questions in the chat. This batch build, I told you, it's been kind of a game changer for us, for me personally. And it's opened the doors for new projects, new programs. And to just name a few, program we call the Wetland Wave. We're basically taking batch and builds to wetland. We went from 0 for 6 on big agricultural wetlands to we now have 2 constructed and 19 under design in just 1 year of turnaround. I will tell you there is no batching construction together on these because you might be looking at $500,000 to $1 million per wetland. But the targeting, the mapping, the fiscal agent funding, these things are all applicable to wetlands. We bought a cover crop seeder. We formalized a partnership with a local co-op to sell this machine, to group together installs, to get a different application on the landscape. And again, the first year of this program, we seeded 4,000, then we jumped to 7,000, and then 8,000 acres. And now we're going to be hopefully cracking 10,000 acres through our cover crop seeder this year. And last one, completely different spin, but we do some urban work, right? We got a lot of homeowners that in cities, and we have a practice that's called soil quality restoration. And you can see the house on the left there. We actually do a deep tine aeration and spread compost over the yard. Generally see a 3 to 5% increase in organic matter and a significant improvement in infiltration rates. So we're trying to soak in more water. We brought the batch and build to it. So here homeowners actually pay 50% to their local city groups together and hires one contractor to do a mass production. We've seen an average square foot cost drop from 31 cents down to 12 cents per square foot. And we've seen adoption rates go from about 50 across the Des Moines Metro to around 300 last fall. So we're seeing big upticks. We're seeing cost drop. And to end with, thank you all for listening to me. And there's some pictures of some cute little girls playing in water because what are we doing if not trying to clean the water so we can all get out there and enjoy it? So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John. That was great. Very interesting. And like you said, those lessons learned translate so well to so many other things. I'm thinking about how things like, reducing barriers and targeting outreach and being a salesman, like definitely resonate with the work that I do with, volunteer recruitment. So we do have some questions, and folks who are listening, feel free to keep dropping those in the Q&A. And John, if that's okay, I'll go ahead and just kind of try and feed these to you in like a logical order.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we have a question from Kathy. She asks, how many staff did this require? And did you need to hire new staff or just reorganize the folks you already had on the roles?
So, that's a great question. It's hard. So with very experienced staff, which is what we have, like we're doing this with existing staff, but really it's more about identifying roles. So that I mentioned there's 13 other of these projects now happening. Now, what are those roles? Those roles are an outreach person. Uh, so who's going to actually go to the landowners and talk to them? And it includes like a survey fieldwork person. And now that could be the same person, but somebody has to do that work. Uh, you have to have kind of the money manager or the team lead, which is generally my role. And you have to have the designer. Now, each of those have different skill sets, and a traditional watershed coordinator can do a lot of those roles together. Now, I would say a batch and build of one person could probably do all of a batch and build, but if you're like us, we have other jobs, other projects and programs too. So we're able to divvy up and do this team approach, and we all kind of it's all like 10 to 20% of each of our jobs, and we just work together doing it in that way. So we actually do have a guidance document that actually outlines like explicitly how many hours you would expect to be assigned to each of those roles, so people can make real decisions of whether they could tackle this. So happy to share some of those resources if y'all want to reach out to me.
That is really cool. If you didn't already share your contact info, do you want to let people know how they can reach out? You might have already done that.
Yeah, definitely the best is Jonathan.Swanson at Polk County, Iowa. Maybe Heather, we can find a place, or just Google Polk County and you'll find my contact, and I'll get you hooked up. There's actually one of my original coordinators. He's now works for the state IDOLs, and it's his entire job to help people start batch and builds, Tanner Foles. So there's resources out there to help expand some of these programs, and it's happening in other states as well.
Sweet. Well, speaking of resources, someone asked, is there a template for the standardized survey process that you use?
Yes, there is. Again, reach out. We've actually developed like a step-by-step guide, and there's some, and we've really honed it in. I say we did it wrong that first year, and it was like terribly bad use of time. But now we have it honed in, like we're like an hour per tile outlet, right? So that's super efficient, and so we can help you guys skip all that pain and jump right to how to do it right, and then do it good enough that you can give it to about any designer, and they should be able to tackle it. And um, there's all these resources out there. If you Google batch and build, you'll find all types of good resources.
That's awesome. And I did just drop your email in the chat, so if folks need to grab that, it is there. You did kind of mention this, but someone asked if if batch and build as a model has made it out of Iowa into neighboring states, or I guess not even neighboring states.
Yeah, so the person that's kind of carrying the torch to other states is Keegan Cole with the Agricultural Drainage Management Coalition. Terrible name there, ADMC. But Keegan has currently projects happening Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, I believe, doing similar methods. It's just about applicability. Like saturated buffers don't work in every state, right? But they work in many other states. So that's kind of where a lot of the people are carrying. And we've kind of moved on from saturated buffers and bioreactors to all this other stuff, these other practices where like we're seeing like doubling, tripling, quadrupling number of landowners engaged. So it's working.
That's awesome. Was there a state match for the federal funds through EQIP and RCPP?
Yes, there was. So if you're familiar with EQIP and RCPP, they pay on a flat rate based upon their funding scenarios, and actually pays that very well. So they're close. They're close. I'd say they're over 75%. And so we had those assignment of payments. So we knew X dollars were going to be going to each of those applicable sites. And then in our case, IDOL's funding provided the match needed. So for those sites, Polk County was in for $0. The one caveat I would say, if you use EQIP or RCPP right off the bat, you will double the amount of paperwork. And that just is what it is. It's just the name of the game. And it might take 6 to 18 months to get your reimbursement from the feds. It just is what it is. It can be done. We still do it. But we usually hold off for landowners who have maybe been through the federal process before, because that paperwork can scare people away. That's been our experience.
Another question, have you targeted shared drainage infrastructure through drainage districts, or do you just focus exclusively on private land?
We have more with our wetlands program than with bioreactors and saturated buffers, largely because most shared drainage systems, they have more water than these practices can hold. Now, anytime you you touch a drainage district tile system, you have to get their approval. So we've had an increasing number of interactions with them every year. It's like a kind of another group that has to approve your project. A lot of lessons learned. I see some of our biggest opportunities to get a big changes done will be with drainage districts, and we've had some very positive and a few negative interactions recently. But a lot of hope with how can we better engage those people. Another presentation in of itself.
Oh, I just responded to everyone. Someone asked a question, if the recording will be available. It will be. We will share it within the next day or so on our website, and I believe you'll get an email about it too. Another question. This is, I think, in reference to when you're visiting sites for the first time for the survey. What criteria was used for water testing? Like what time of year? Do you do it after they apply nitrogen, after rain? Are there any criteria?
Yeah, definitely. So I will tell you there's a lot of back and forth on what and how much sampling should we do.
Mm.
Right. So I'll tell you a couple things that has become very clear for me is one, if we're on the Des Moines lobe and we have subsurface drainage that's not just servicing surface intakes, uh, almost every one of those sites is going to have elevated nitrate levels at different times of the year. That first year, we worked with Iowa Soybean Association and their lab, who had kind of a standardized process to take a sample and to take a basically a quantity sample to figure out load, like what kind of load is coming out of this. We sampled all 100 plus outlets. Every one of them met the threshold for needing to be treated. Again, what did that tell us? We didn't need to be treating it. We didn't need to be testing every outlet. So we no longer do that. What we're now spending our effort doing is we have one sub watershed where we treated almost every single outlet, and we actually have real-time nitrate sensors to say on more of a watershed scale, did we make a difference? I sure hope so, because we spent a lot of work on it. But we're actually going through we got the pre-data. We installed like 40 plus in that little sub watershed. Did we quantify benefits? So a lot of research out there, but a lot of agreements in the science community about the effectiveness of a saturated buffer in a bioreactor. So we haven't done a lot of individual practice sampling, maybe half a dozen, to see does a saturated buffer work. We've seen up to 90% reductions, so they seem to be
That's
good.
great. And that's like pre and post sampling. Yeah,
Yep, like before it goes into practice, after it goes out of the practice.
cool. Well, you know, we are big fans of water monitoring here.
Right, water's good. Now here's a fun story. Like right, like I'm not a monitoring person. My job is like how to get people to do stuff. But like a lot of times monitoring people, like they have trouble connecting with landowners, especially the ag community. So like they come to us and we're like, yeah, like I know these people. I'll give them a holler, and everyone's been like, yeah, for sure they can come out. So we've just provided the connection. So like we open the door and all the researchers come running in. So it's been kind of a fun, unexpected partnership on that end.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those benefits of actually building a relationship, not just, you know, sending out a thing in the mail.
Totally.
I think I've gotten to everyone's question. Oh no, there's some more. Will the slides be available in addition to the recording?
Yeah, Heather, I don't know if you want to share those or if people want to reach out to me. I don't whatever you want to do.
If you send them to me, I can probably get them to everyone. I say with utmost confidence.
Yeah.
Send them my way, and I will do my best to get them out there. We have a question. How does this, I think this meaning saturated buffers, differ from a riparian buffer?
Yes, great question. Right. So by definition, riparian buffer has to do with the vegetation adjacent to the stream, also called a filter strip, right? So again, for everyone's context, you have a stream, right? And then you're like, okay, if there's no buffers at all, like maybe they're farming right to the edge of the stream. So if you're adding riparian buffers or a filter strip, you're going to add, say, 30, 50, 100 foot of vegetation. Maybe it's prairie, maybe it's a tree planting, maybe it's a cool season brome. That's kind of lame, but people do that too. And the purpose of that is to help treat surface water and habitat, right? But if water's running off the surface, usually soil is getting carried and erodes. It's going to get caught in that filter strip and it's going to help clean the surface water. The problem with that, and we spent a lot of years and we still promote that, if there's a tile going underneath that riparian or filter strip, that is killing nitrates right under your vegetation and it's not getting treated. So if you already have at least if you only have if you have just 30 foot of vegetation on adjacent to your stream you have enough space for a saturated buffer, period. And so if you're already there, you're like halfway there. Why wouldn't you install a saturated buffer so you can treat the subsurface water and the surface water? And it's been amazing how many people we go to. And the first year we targeted just people that had the buffers. Now we target more than that. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I've been meaning to put that into buffers. Could you guys help me do that? And we're like, yeah, we'd love to help you do that. And then like we get them both done at once, and it's awesome too.
We love that efficiency. Do you need fencing to exclude farm animals from the tile buffers or bioreactors?
You do not. Although we have installed these practices through pastures and through actively grazed areas. We a lot of times do. We will sometimes put some extra protection around the boxes, but I think we've actually stopped doing that because like they're aluminum boxes. Like the cattle and livestock don't hurt them. Uh, Again, what a great place! You already have the grass cover. Like, why wouldn't we put these in uh, pastures? Now, I will say one of our other goals is to exclude uh, livestock from streams so they can't get into the streams and offering alternative water sources. So we've worked that into the conversation too, and we've done a little bit of that as well.
I love it. They just keep coming in. Have you had experience placing BMPs in road ditches?
Um, we have not, other than we just brought back, we have what's called an integrated roadside vegetation management. That's a long name, IRVM. Polk County's motto is leading the way. It turns out we were one of like only 20 counties in Iowa that didn't have a roadside program. So we've gotten back into the game of putting prairies in our road ditches. Some counties in Northeast Iowa very successful with doing some temporary flood control that also offers water quality benefits in road by downsizing road culverts. Very unique. They're also prevalently used in Nebraska, I've heard, but not something we've done a lot of. Other than we also do a lot of urban stormwater along our roadsides to capture, filter, and infiltrate water before it dumps in to a storm sewer, specifically bioretention cells. We've built our first 25. Way to go all in. We went from 0 to 25 last year. So
That's the way. I like how you started that answer by saying not really, and then you totally have.
yeah, I'm like, let me think about that. Maybe not as many
That's
as other
great.
people.
Uh, well, thank you all for your great questions. I guess I have one more. You kind of alluded to this already. Looking ahead, you've mentioned how, I mean, not only is this like expanding beyond Polk County into other counties, other states, it's expanding into different practices a little bit. But going forward with the saturated buffers, are you ever going to be, there's no place to put a saturated buffer? Or is it just like for the foreseeable future, there's work to be done?
Yeah, I'd say we're getting close to we got an evident change in the sites we're surveying now that they're not as good as sites. And that's why we very intentionally kind of moved on to other practices. But people actually we didn't know outreach actually last year. People just call us and want to do the program. And so while we've tried to slow down, people do keep bringing us some good sites. But now we're really trying to help other counties that have maybe more of a target rich environment to help them get rolling. Because that's the best thing we can do. If we want people upstream to do it, like we can't really, though we've tried, we can't really go upstream and do it for other people. But I'd say, and that's good too, right? Because there's only so many outlets in a county. So I think we're close to 150 installed in our county, which is a roughly half urban county, half ag. And I think we're getting really close to all of our suitable sites being treated, which is an awesome problem to have.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Oh, wait, we see one more. What practices are you currently focused on as you move away from saturated buffers?
Yeah, the two big ones. We have a cover crop program. I'm not a soil health person. I know enough just to start a program, and I let other people run it. The two practices that we're very much focused on is one wetlands. Uh, Keeping in mind that one wetland might equate environmentally water quality wise as like 20 to 50 saturated buffers, right? So
Mhm.
one strategically placed wetland is a big deal. So we're going crazy with wetlands, another presentation. And then the other one is we actually stream restoration. So we have secured funding to do what we believe is the biggest single stream restoration ever done in Iowa. We're doing 10 miles in the next 2 years. And we have a big research program also to quantify the benefits of stream restoration and water quality wise, how should it be applicable statewide is one of the big questions. So we're really excited to be getting into streams, and that's become kind of the main streams and wetlands are our main focus for the next 2 years.
That's great. You also get all those added habitat benefits and lots of other good things. Yeah.
So many benefits.
Awesome. Well, thank you to our audience for their great questions. And of course, thank you to John Swanson for that really great presentation and Q&A. I will do my best to share your slides, John. Also, this recording will be shared, and you can find John's email address up in the chat, jonathan.swatson@polkcountyiowa.gov, or on the internet.
Yeah, just Google me. That
All
sounds really
right.
easy.
Well,
But
thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
thanks,
See you.
Heather. See you.